So in this video, we're going to walk through creating a purchase quote. So this is something that can be used so that you can send a document to a supplier, a group of suppliers, so that you can indicate an item or a resource or a quantity that you want them to quote on. And then you can actually take that purchase document and convert it to a purchase order. So if you've watched any of the videos on the blanket purchase order, a lot of this may be a refresher. If you're just starting in this video series, sort of midway picking this video, we'll walk through some of those fields again. So in this section, we're going to go to creating a purchase quote, and we are just going to do the manual creation of a quote. So I'm going to go ahead and from within Business Central, I'm going to navigate to my purchase quote page. If this isn't pinned to my main role center and I would like it to be, I can always come here and bookmark this. So rather than having to search all the time now, it would pin it to my main role center. I could just select my purchase quotes from here. So this would bring me to a list of any open quotes that I have in my system. I haven't created any yet, so I'm going to go ahead and just click on New. So the first thing that it's going to ask me to do is indicate the supplier that I want to do my purchase quote to. So I could say Nod, even though that's not the full name, even though that's not the number. I can see that the system is smart enough to search my fields and filter that way. I could always click on my three dots. It would bring me to a list of all of the vendors that I have in my system, and I could choose them that way as well. As soon as I've navigated off of my name, it has assigned me a purchase quote number. So this is controlled by what's called your number series in Business Central. So if you don't like that it's 4 digits, if you wanted it to be alphanumeric and have a prefix on it, you would have full ability to be able to update that and change that. And again, it's through your number series. You can indicate the contact that you're working with. So again, Raymond's the one that's populated for me, but if I needed to, I could choose another value. So right now I can see that I've only got one contact person that's associated to this contact company. My contact company is always going to be the sort of top level umbrella. It's bolded. This lets me know that it's just the company contact. All of your people that are associated to that specific company, and that company is associated to the vendor, they are not bolded and they're listed below. So a really quick way to add a new contact, you could click on New. I'm going to let the system just assign for me a contact. I'll put in my name here. I indicate that this is a contact person. I have to associate a contact person to a contact company. And because I was already in that vendor area, it recognized that I wanted to associate to Nod Publishers. We can see that this is related to a vendor. And so that way, when I'm on a purchase document for Nod Publishers and I click on contact, it's only going to show me the people that are related to that specific vendor. The other key area that people are typically going to update, and we can click on show more to see everything, is going to be our address and contact information. So it will default in from the contact company. If they were at another location, I could update this. If there was a phone number associated to my contact company, it would default in. But because I'm dealing with a specific person, I can indicate there that mobile phone number for that specific person. I may want to email, make that change to that there so that I can have the specific email address for that specific contact and use that when I'm sending the purchase quote. Again, we've got fax number, home page, if I correspond with them. So these are the key things that are filled into a contact card. Of course, we can always drill into more detail in a live session. I can associate a contact picture. I could go ahead and I could see, based on the hyperlink, if I've got any costs associated to that contact. If I've got any other relationships created, I could attach notes and links to that specific contact. And if I don't want to see any of that, I can just close what's called the fact box. So now at this point, I can see that I've got Raymond and I've got Jenn both associated to Nod Publishers, and I could go ahead and choose either one of those. I'll go ahead and leave it with Raymond for now. So you'll notice I have a small set of fields in the general section, but when I selected the vendor, I would maybe want to see the full address and more information. So you can go ahead and click on Show More. And this is going to open up the general section and show us some of the fields that we've indicated that we want through personalization to see when we expand that area. So this has defaulted in from the from the vendor card. So you can see the address information. Again, this is the primary vendor. If I had a phone number, a mobile phone number associated to that contact, we would see that there. I've got document date. So this date represents the date that I've created the document inside of my ERP system. This is a due date field. This is not to be confused with the due date of when you would want the product to be received. This is more of a payment prediction field. So what this is predicting for me is if I were to post a purchase order for this vendor today, what are my terms? When would that be due? So for a lot of operations people or purchasing people, I typically recommend that you either move this field through personalization down into the invoicing section, or maybe even just hide it completely. Order date is the date that you place the purchase quote with your supplier. So some people just call these in or email these in, but then they put it into their ERP system later so that they have record of that and register that. So the order date would be when you've put that order quote in with the supplier. Document date is when you created it in your ERP. If down the line you do decide that you want to take this purchase quote and convert it to an order, you can update this order date with the date that you do that conversion. You can either do it on the quote side so that it pulls into the purchase order, or you can leave this as the order date as it stands in the purchase quote and then update it in the purchase order. Either one is fine. It just becomes part of what you practice and what you train on. And I'll show that in a moment. You can archive different quote versions. So let's say there's some back and forth with your supplier, and every time you make a different iteration or a change, you wanted to take a snapshot of that purchase quote, you would be able to do that. When you convert your quote to an order, the system automatically will take that snapshot. But let's say down the line, as I mentioned, you wanted to change a quantity, you wanted to change a date, and we could probably do this down the line too, but under the processes up above, there is a ability to say archive document. And again, whatever the quote looks like, whatever the details are on that document at that time, it's just going to basically take a picture of it, and then it moves it to an archive table. So if I open this up, I'm able to see that I've got one version of this. And then again, I can do that multiple times throughout, and I can pick and choose at what point, it makes sense for me to archive, and that I would call more of a business decision. So you've got requested receipt date, which is when you want the product to be in-house. Down below in the invoicing section, you've got the expected receipt date. So expected receipt date is when the product is going to be available and usable and ready for, production or for shipment. I often recommend to just move this expected receipt date up into this general section as well. The requested receipt date will look at things like your warehouse handling time, and it will show you, or it could calculate for you when you would want the product to be received at your facility. Vendor order number. So again, once this quote becomes an order, if that vendor has their own order number, you could reference that. Again, this becomes a little bit more of a usable field once we convert, which we'll go over. Purchaser code would be your ability to associate your buyer or whoever you are placing as the responsible person for this quote. If you've got multiple address codes, meaning that they've got multiple locations that you could order from, you could add these to your Business Central tables and then select those. When you see new and select from full list, this means that you will have the ability to dictate what is in that table. So this is not a mandatory field. You do not have to use this feature. But again, if Nod Publisher had 10 different locations across the city, you would have the ability to be able to select which address you're buying from, or quoting from in this case so far. Down below, you've got your invoicing details. So these will pull in based on the vendor card. If the terms or if the shipment method or if there was some detail from the vendor master record that was slightly different only for this quote, you could make a change. So let's say, for example, your payment terms were typically current month, but they were going to give you 30-day terms on this quote because of some negotiation or conversation that was had. You can make this change, and it's only changing it for this transaction. It's not changing your master record. If the vendor's payment terms have changed permanently and moving forward, all purchase documents needed to have the new payment terms, you could drill into the vendor and you would go down into their invoicing task or wherever, depending on what you're changing, wherever it's applicable, and you would change the vendor card directly. Sorry, it's under payments. So this could be changed from current month to net 30. So when you're making any kind of changes to the default information that's come in, you want to ask yourself, is this a permanent change or is this a change just for this specific quote? Down below, you've got your shipping and payment. So you can indicate on your purchase documents where you want that product to be shipped to and received to. So if you select default company address, it's going to look at the company information page and what's set up. You could indicate that you want to receive to a separate location. So if you're a company that has multiple warehouses and multiple locations set up in Business Central, you could quote to those specific warehouses. And you could actually have custom address selected as well. So let's say you needed to make a purchase quote and you want a one-time address would be where it was going to be shipped to. You could indicate that. You can also indicate a pay to. So by default, it assumes that whatever vendor you've put in the general section is the vendor that you would create and pay. That'd be the balance on their account. You could also, if they had a parent company or a sister company, you could indicate that you want to pay another vendor. So that is your header type information. Now we'll focus on your purchase lines. So when you're creating a purchase quote, and I'm going to go ahead and just collapse this fact box so we can get a better look at it, you can see that you're going to have the ability to be able to purchase or do a purchase quote for various things. So if I chose to, I could add to a GL account, an item, a resource, a fixed asset, or a charge item. We can explore these in deeper sessions, but for today, I'm really just going to focus on the GL account and the item because those are the most common. So if I were to select GL account, that's very common for something that's a special buy. It's a one-off. I don't want to create a master record in my system. So when I have the type of GL account, I'll notice that the chart of accounts populates. So I could, again, not knowing the accounts maybe, I just start typing based on a name. The system's smart enough to auto filter. So I'll select a GL account. The description's populating here. Well, that's not something that's going to be very user-friendly to my vendor. So I could go ahead and I could indicate, a tool spec. I could put in something just a little bit more user-friendly to my vendor so they know what I bought. It could be a specific material with a specific dimension. It could be a drawing number reference, whatever you want. But in the description, you're likely going to want to override that to something that everybody could understand. GL accounts don't require locations. We'll use the item reference and location when we focus on an item in our next example. But here I can indicate the quantity that I want quoted on. I'm going to leave the direct unit cost blank because that's something that I'm going to have my vendor come back to me on. I can see for this line that it's a taxable and this is the tax area code, so it knows, what percentage to use. They may give you back a direct unit cost and then say they're going to give you a discount. These types of things we can add after the fact, right before we convert it to an order. But the key things that you're going to add are going to be what type, what's the number we need to associate it to, so in this case, the account. Update the description to make sure that it makes sense, and we'll indicate the quantity you want them to quote on. Another option would be to add an item. So you may say, I haven't purchased this in a really long time. I'd really love for the vendor to just give me some updated costs on this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick my chair here. If I have it set up on my item master record that for my inventory item 1900-S, NOD publisher has their own part ID, I can set that up as what's called an item reference. That's done on my master record, and it would automatically default into the line. That's a really helpful thing to put on your purchase quotes or your purchase orders, because the vendor typically cares what they call it. They don't always have the same part ID as you, so this gives you the ability to put both into your ERP. In this case for item, I'm just going to allow it to stay in my description field. We typically set up that location is mandatory, so I'm going to tell the system which location I am purchasing this for. If this becomes an order, this is where when I receive it, it will increase into. I could indicate here how many guest chairs I want to quote on. So in this case, I could say 4 pieces, meaning I want you to quote on 4 chairs. Or for this item, I've got what's called a unit of measure conversion set up. So the unit of measure conversion allows me to say that for this item, I could transact either in pieces or I could transact in sets. So when I do that, if I were to say, well, I want to buy then 1 set, if this becomes an order and I receive it, the system would be smart enough to know that 1 set is actually 4 pieces or 4 chairs. So I can set this up on any of my documents, and now when I send this off to the supplier to quote it, they'll say, oh, what's the set price for this, which may be different than the piece price. So on this item card, there was a unit cost that had defaulted in based on the last time that I bought it. It would be a business decision as to whether or not you want to keep that or display that or show that to the vendor. If you wanted to, you can always clear that out, because again, with a quote, you want them to quote and tell you the latest price. So that might be something that you want to just leave open. If on the master record, the tax group code and tax area code are there, it should just default in the same way that it did for the GL account. But if you are taxable and you've missed the master record, you may need to key it in like I just did here for the tax area code, so that the system would know, by the way, we would charge taxes on this, and based on the jurisdiction or where they're located, this is the percentage to use. So one of the key takeaways with that is when you're looking at creating vendor cards, item cards, GL account cards, you really want your master records to be as complete as possible, so that during transactions, you're not having to backfill and put in a lot of information. Certainly information that would just be the same all the time. So again, key things when you're dealing with an item would be your item. What's the item, whether it's an inventory or non-inventory item that you want them to quote on. Description will pull in. Which location are you purchasing or getting a quote for? What's the quantity? What's the unit of measure? And then your tax information. It fully supports using dimensions. So if you guys are tagging or using dimensions in your project so that the financials and reporting can be a little bit more in depth, fully supported in your purchase quote document. You can also add comments. So I could indicate that there's a comment that I want to add. So here, this just opens up a line for me to be able to put in a free-form description of any quote or comment that I want to make. The nice thing about this is that when I print my quote document, Without any programming or extra development, this would be something that would just show up on my quote document. If you have a comment that you add, quite often, you want it to just be standard and something that you can call upon. When you have a comment here, you can drop down and you'll see these codes. And again, we see the new and advanced, which lets you know that you can change these, you can add to these, but you could then just select a specific number and it's automatically put in a description. All right. So once you've got that information, you can go ahead. You could then send that quote document to your supplier, or you could print and attach it as an email, or you could fax it over if anybody faxes anymore. But you can go ahead and you would send this quote to the supplier. Once it's been sent, you can go ahead and you can release, which would let everybody know the vendor is aware of this. Another nice feature about quotes, and again, you can do this on blanket orders, you can do this on purchase orders as well, is let's say not only did you want not publishers to quote on this, but you also wanted another supplier to quote on the same 2 items. So I could go ahead, I could click on new, I could select a different vendor. I have all the same functionality. I can pick a different contact. I can add my dates. I could add my order information. But then what I could do, rather than keying in all the lines again, is I can go to prepare and I can say copy document. I can copy a quote. I could copy a different order I did, any of these transactions. But again, because I'm just getting a quote document, I'll select which quote I want to copy from. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to include header. I want to be able to pull that information in because it's going to want my vendors to be the same or else I'll get an error. The recalculate lines would indicate whether or not I want the system to go back to the master record and pull the cost or the updated information, or I just want to copy the lines exactly as they are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the recalculate lines off because I had, cleared out the cost information. I don't want to have to do that again. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. So this made it not publishers again. So what I would do is I could just update this to First Up Consultants and just say yes to go through all these prompts where it's asking me if I'm okay to update this. And then here it's taken the lines. So one of the things with the copy function is if you've got 2 different documents and the vendors are different, it will bark at you. So you could also click on new. You could just say prepare, copy document. You could copy that document first, but then it gives you an error that way. So it's a little bit of a weirdness, I guess, in the purchase quotes, but as long as you've got, so example, you pick whoever you want to copy it from is the same. You go ahead, you select which document type, you select the number. You can include the header or not. You could just say, you know what, I want you to copy it exactly as it stands. I don't want you to include the header of that original quote document. You're going to change it anyway. You can just say, okay. Then you can just change this to, like I said, whichever vendor. When it asks you to confirm the change to the vendor, you can say yes. They have their own potentially tax area information. So again, we'll update the lines. If potentially on that vendor, they've got a different pay to, it's letting me know, hey, I'm going to update the pay to. That's fine. So again, it's just letting me know I'm going to move this purchase header information. I'm going to delete the purchase lines and add them based on what you've told me. Are we good with that? To be honest, if you say no, it just stops the whole process. So you kind of have to be good with that. And it's very good. It allows you to not have to key everything in, but it does delete those lines and re-add them. So it will recalculate if you're changing the vendor. If you were just doing a copy because it was a document that you'd used in the past and everything was all the same, it would make an exact copy. But here what you would have to do is you would just do rekeying in either the same description or slightly different description. You would just modify this slightly to match what you need. And then you could go ahead, you could do your send function or your print function, and then you could release that to let everybody know that, okay, I've now got these 2 quotes that are out. So Graphic Design Institute has come back. You really like what they offered you. So what you can do then is you can convert this purchase quote to a purchase order. So if you were on your main role center here, you would just navigate back into your purchase quotes. You could use your search function up here. You could type in the quote that you want to convert, and we're going to go ahead and open that. So because it's released, it has it in a lock state. So you would just change the status here to reopen. This would give you the ability to be able to put in what they've sent back as the price. So we can say that for one set, they're giving you a price of, let's say, $750. Because it was set to being taxable and Ontario was the taxes, it's telling us the amount prior to taxes. It's calculated what our taxes are, and it's given us a total, which is going to be our excluding tax amount plus taxes to be the total what we would have to pay the vendor. You can see a line amount on the line as well as we added the direct unit cost. So this one is saying a quantity of 1 by 520 is 520. Let's say you said, oh gosh, that price is so great. I'm actually going to buy 2 sets of these chairs. I can change the quantity as well. The direct unit cost per one is still the same. And then my line amount is just taking my quantity times my direct unit cost and calculating that for me, which would then update my totals. So once I want to convert my quote to an order, I'm going to want to make sure that my order date reflects the date that I placed the order with the supplier. And the reason that that's important is because you can set purchase prices up on your item master record. And if you've got starting and ending dates reflecting cost changes depending on certain dates, the order date is going to be what drives whether it selects the old price or the new price. So your order date should reflect the date that you placed the order with the supplier. So of course you can use your date picker and just select the date. This is just letting me know, by the way, this might affect your price and discount for, again, the reason I just mentioned, because if you've got purchase pricing with starting and ending dates, it could update because it's going to go back to that table and look at whether or not that is still applicable. So it's just letting you know you might want to double check those. So I can say, okay. Then I would just double check down here that this all still applies. Within Business Central, which is really cool, if you put in just a number, depending on your system work date, it's going to assume current month, current date, or current year. If I did, 4.5, it's going to assume current year. If I do a T and then tab off, it's going to pick the work date from my computer. So again, just some nice little shortcuts in the system that you'll get to know as you use the system more and more. But now my order date has been updated. Again, if that vendor has their own order number, I can enter that. And then under process, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to indicate that I want to make order. This is going to convert this purchase quote to a purchase order. So it's going to ask me to confirm. Once I do this, this purchase quote will go away. It's going to then convert and not be a quote anymore. It'll be an order. So just so that we're fully aware of the process, this quote 1003 will be gone. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I want to convert that to an order. And then it's going to open up my purchase order page. If I say yes, it's let me know the purchase order number, so I can open that up in a new window. And now I see the purchase order. With the purchase order number that it gave me, it's going to have my order date. It has my lines with the direct unit cost and the unit of measure that I had selected. And it references here which quote it was created from. If I go back into my purchase quote list, I now see that that purchase quote is gone away. And then it becomes a business decision what you want to do. You could always delete that quote. You could leave it here. You could, like I said, open up that quote. Under the process, you could archive. So you get a snapshot of the quote at this time. And then if this is something that you know will never become an order, to keep your quote list clean, you could go ahead and just delete it. And then this becomes just a list of any of your active purchase quotes and what you need. At that point, it's then a purchase order. You could navigate into the purchase order, or when it had opened up, when it was prompted, you could go ahead and just send that to the supplier at that point.